Let's see here.
So here we are. We are really happy to welcome, well, now I will do a mess with the surname, Charlotte Kroløkke. I'm pretty sure the
It's good. It's good.
But Danish is such a difficult language. So anyway, Charlotte, it's really a pleasure to have you here. And today we will talk about a very important topic. This liquid gold is just maternal milk, as you will see. And so Charlotte seminar is really in line with other seminars that we have already hosted on the commodification of human bodies, or in general contested commodities. So Charlotte, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marcella, and thank you to Marcella and to all of you for being here this afternoon. I've been very much looking forward to it. And thank you for situating yourself in terms of being within gender studies, many of you at least. And I thought maybe I just very quickly, very briefly situate myself in light of that as well. I'm a professor in cultural studies, and my work is within what I refer to as feminist cultural science studies. And that means that I'm interested in the ways in which science, in particular health science and medical science and technologies, how they become understood and how they often gain sort of an understanding as being truths, as being matters of fact. Where in my reading of science and technology, I look at the ways in which they have cultural meanings and often have gendered implications. And when I think about gender, I think about it in a more stratified sense, that is in the sense of gender, nationality, race, religion, age, sexuality, etc. So I have the pleasure today to speak about something that I have done a bit of work with. I'm doing work together with Associate Professor Catherine Carroll, who's at the Australian National University. And Catherine has actually done a lot more work on this topic than I have. So it's my pleasure to present our work to you this afternoon, and I look forward to, and I hope that you will have questions, and all questions are welcomed. So as I said, my work today is is a collaboration with Catherine Carroll from Australian National University, in which we specifically would like to use feminist perspectives to understand the ways that breast milk becomes exchangeable in Denmark. That is, how breast milk can be donated by women who are breastfeeding to a milk bank and then be sold to hospitals throughout the Danish realm, which includes not only Denmark, but Greenland and the Faroe Islands as well. So breast milk, of course, is a maternal fluid which is produced after birth. And thanks to the labors of breastfeeding and the use of a breast pump, which is a technological invention, women often can breastfeed for weeks, months, and even years following the birth of a baby. So part of this presentation is looking at the Danish case and exploring how breast milk then is being made exchangeable in this Danish case. And that means looking at the Danish state, national and international health organizations, and commercial entities, and seeing how they facilitate the process of moving breast milk from the woman who has produced the milk to hospitals, milk banks, and other women. This is also what we, in a sense, call a web of different relations. And similar to feminist scholars, then I think that there's something really important and interesting about this. But first, I want to share with you our research question. So this is our research question. We basically ask, how does breast milk emerge as a property that can be owned and sold by lactating mothers, while at the same time foster universalist Danish welfare goals of enhancing population health and creating a shared resource that can be redistributed to some of the most vulnerable Danish citizens? This is a typical academic question that is too long for almost one breath. But nevertheless, that's what we're looking at. And so let me begin the presentation by first looking at the Danish case, arguing in a sense that it's important to understand this case and also understand a bit of the history of breastfeeding and feminist perspectives attached onto this case. So that's what we're going to do to begin with, looking at the Danish case, looking at the history of breastfeeding, which is a fascinating history, and looking at feminist perspectives that can help us, in a sense, understand these different parameters. So very briefly, the establishment of milk banks in Scandinavia and in Denmark can be traced to the end of the 1930s and 1940s. At that time, scientific knowledge about the healing and vital aspects of breast milk became combined with a focus on child health, and later the development of the milk pump, which has kind of been essential in order to create milk banks. In Denmark, milk banks, what they're referred to, currently take place in 3 separate public state-owned locations: in Copenhagen, the capital, in Aarhus, the 2nd largest city, and in Aalborg, the 4th largest city in Denmark. According to Danish protocols at the hospitals, breast milk providing should, due to the higher levels of protein in the milk, start during the first 8 to 10 weeks after the birth of a baby. And prior to that, the provider, which is the preferred term that I use about the donor, the milk donor, it must be able to have an excess of a minimum of 200 milliliter of milk. And she has to undergo blood tests and have a phone conversation with the milk bank staff before she can become a provider. So providers must be seen by the milk bank staff as being healthy. And following this procedure, the provider's milk is being picked up and then available to state-owned hospitals. The sale price of 1 liter of breast milk goes anywhere between approximately 135 euros and 230 euros, depending on the level of protein in the breast milk. Meanwhile, the woman who is providing the bank with the milk receives around 26 euros per liter of milk. The milk bank is a non-for-profit association. They use the funding to be able to screen, pasteurize, and sort of examine the material before it's being provided to typically neonatal intensive care units or to other women who have difficulty breastfeeding for whatever reasons. So empirically today, what I'll be talking about relies on information from the 3 hospitals in Denmark, conversations with the head of the milk bank at the largest milk bank in Denmark. Also, I'll be drawing upon popular culture, media accounts on breast milk providing. And in turning to this material, in a sense, I'm arguing that our understanding of how breast milk becomes exchangeable relies on these various different actors or institutions. So that's sort of the basic the case, and what I want to do now before I go into sort of more the analysis is to look at some of the history of breast milk feeding and also the feminist perspective. So let's quickly look at this. I want to say all these photos, the one to the upper left hand is from the milk bank in Copenhagen. It's part of the recruitment material. And the other 2 photos are part of an advertising campaign for breastfeeding that is carried out by a company that creates breast pumps. And it's interesting to see, of course, how the father sort of becomes included in this, but perhaps we can discuss this some more. But interesting for sure is the fact that breastfeeding is very popular today and is really seen as the best food or nutrition for the newborn, but it's not always, that has not always been the case in Denmark. In fact, in the early 1900s, the development of milk from cows, from formulas, became quite widespread, and breast milk substitutes were supported through the growth of these technologies of cow milk, pasteurization, and refrigeration. In the post-World War II years, it was then a majority view that bottle feeding, that is using using substitutes, was superior to breastfeeding. But in the late 20th century and here in the early 21st century, there's been an absolute growing public support for breastfeeding, along with maternalist organizing and activism that sort of center woman-centered maternity care and autonomy over breastfeeding, including where breastfeeding can take place. So in contemporary Denmark today, breast milk, which is frequently in Danish referred to as maternal or mother's milk, is positioned as the best food for newborn. In fact, according to the Danish Pediatric Society, breast milk consists of the correct nutritional requirements for infants and babies up until 6 months of age. And the Danish health authorities today recommends for new mothers to breastfeed exclusively until 6 months of age and continue breastfeeding until the introduction of solid foods and all the way up until the age of 2. So not only does breast milk composition adjust, the Danish scientific sort of authorities tell us, according to the needs of the developing baby, maternal or mother's milk is also speculated in scientific accounts as having other qualities. For example, in the Danish material, like in other high-income countries, such as in the United States, breastfeeding gets seen as being correlated with higher intelligence, and with it a stronger likelihood that the child would end up with high education and income, and thus become a better welfare state citizen that is paying more in taxes and so forth. So, and not only is this idea, and it's scientifically not proven, but it's an idea that sort of is seen in various material. Not only this, but in the Danish media, we see the idea that breast milk is not only good for the baby, but also good for the mother, and accordingly also to the welfare state. Breastfed children have seemingly fewer illnesses, and breastfeeding mothers are viewed as generally healthier. So in this regard, breastfeeding is depicted as having sort of a range of positive values that go beyond the immediate nutritional aims to include the economic and population health of society as a whole. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily exclusively problematic. In some ways, it's a very nice aspect of Danish culture. The breastfeeding is seen now as something that is valuable. However, it also has become a very normative and quite stressful time for young Danish mothers to be able to fulfill this sort of requirement and norm in regards to breastfeeding today. So what do feminists have to say about this? And this is, I'm sure you could add quite a bit in terms of your own work within gender and society and in classes on gender studies. But if we look at sort of the exchange aspects of exchanging breast milk or other types of reproductive fluids, and especially if we look at other types of reproductive fluids, then feminist scholars have been very good at pointing out that what seems voluntary, that is a voluntary exchange, it's not necessarily free of anything exploitive. It might still have exploitative aspects. Feminist scholars, as you know, work to make visible the many practices of women's material labor that are relegated to the private sphere and which are crucially involved in reproduction. So drawing on Marilyn Waring's classic work, If Women Counted, feminist economics or economists have long decried the invisibility and devaluation of women's contribution to the producers of breast milk, to both the infant food sector and infant healthcare. Julie Smith, and I included this link in this presentation just before we got started, but Julie Smith is an interesting scholar working out of the Australian National University and is thus an Australian scholar. She works to create what she calls the Mother's Milk Tool to account for women's economic contribution through breastfeeding, including the cost of breastfeeding to women, such as the involvement of their time. So basically what feminist scholars are doing, in which you all know, is the important work of emphasizing that this is actually labor that should be accounted for, and turning the invisible into something that's visible work. So feminist scholars also argue that processes that are enacted by women in making milk and separating milk from their bodies, these processes enter the value chain of human milk commodification. And feminist scholarship then, excuse me, breast milk providing gains value throughout being extracted, being promoted, being commodified, and being consumed. So whether or not milk donors are compensated, and whether the recipient pays for milk or not, human milk still turns into a property and becomes sort of part of the wider discourses of human milk value and commercialization by the state, promotion, and public health campaigns. So you can see how in this kind of work that feminist scholars are noting how voluntary bodily exchanges, such as blood donation and banking systems across cultural contexts, also sort of create economic value. So while using donor milk instead of infant formula, it's also something that really creates more healthy babies and creates value in that context. Excuse me.
Don't worry, Charlotte.
But that's fine. A bit more water, I think.
Take your time.
So I think I'm fine again, and otherwise I'll take a break. So what Catherine and I want to do is to advance a feminist framework to highlight the ways that breast milk can be owned and shared by women and by families, and situated within a history of breastfeeding. So this extends, of course, to the doing of motherhood, different technological developments, and how these become spoken into existence in frequently, we would say, gendered ways. Breast milk providing, aside from having this economic value, also is a form of kinship value in a sense, and thus can be seen as an act of maternal care. So let's look a bit on some of the analytical sort of incisions or analytical highlights that we're trying to make. And I'll give you some examples, and I'll take a bit more of the water. So I'm going to make two analytical highlights before I open up for discussion and your comments. So down on the lower right-hand side, you can see a headline in Danish. This is from a Danish news program, and the headline is "Lucrative Business, Make 196 Danish kroner per liter of mother's milk." And the program begins by stating that annually about 4,000 babies are born prematurely in Denmark. In this brief televised presentation of the milk bank in Copenhagen, the milkman, which is also kind of an interesting gendered term, and you see the milkman being presented in the picture above on the upper right-hand corner, is being presented as the one who picks up breast milk at the providers' homes. And there's also an interview with one of the breast milk providers, conceptualizing the providing of breast milk as a life-saving choice, making the difference, we're told, between life and death. So in this story, a picture of a premature infant rests on the mother's breast, weighing a little more than a liter of milk, we're told, comes together with narratives of women giving breast milk. So in the Danish context, in this material, monetary payments, the payment that is being made, that is being awarded for the providing of breast milk, is continually intermixed with the encouraged desire to help premature infants. Breast milk providing gets articulated as a chance to help the weak, the ill, and the premature infants. visually emerging in the material through photos of colorful lunchboxes and specifically white toddlers, white babies with blue eyes. Providing the babies with breast milk turns also in the material, though, into an act of self-care. Breastfeeding helps women retain their own health, we learn, and it's similarly echoed in some of the campaign and institutional material in which breastfeeding becomes an opportunity for women to continue living healthy lives. In this formulation, healthy lives becomes understood as lives without alcohol, lives without caffeine, lives without smoking, and the providers or the milk bank states that they only receive milk from women who are non-smokers and who do not take any type of medication. Breastfeeding, and with it providing breast milk, becomes then framed as a successful business of some Danish women who easily produce excess milk. So the article and the presentation that we are seeing here states that the one woman milked herself to a record. She received 500,000 Danish kroner on her mother's milk. So introducing a narrative in which this particular woman has been especially successful. That is, she received approximately 62,000 euros on selling her mother's milk. She's a mother of 7. She's being presented in the article and in the news program as having donated an astounding, and I think this is actually really an astounding, 4,308 liters of milk. And if anyone has ever provided and used a breast pump, this is actually an astounding number. She says that she began donating her mother's milk back in the 1980s, contributing to the milk bank through having given birth to 7 babies. And she would, throughout that time, produce around 4 liters of milk a day. Her own milk production became increased, she says, when she listened to Mozart or when watching photos of flowers. It really made the milk flow, she says. So while her narrative, in a sense, as well as that of the televised program, situates this significant income despite its initial headline, it still becomes situated within an altruistic discursive framework. Payment is made very specifically associated with the health of newborn children and the need to help, and thus becomes a form of gifting, even in the shape of the amount of euros that this woman has received. So unlike in Norway and Australia, for example, where payment is prohibited, in the recruitment material of the milk banks, we see the kind of the monetary payment up front. So we're being told that you get a sort of money for your breast milk. We're also told it's taxable income, and the rest of the material basically includes considerations in terms of the practicalities of providing women with their breast milk. So in this manner, practicalities, along with the sort of discourse on helping children, overshadow, we think, the potential monetary compensation, as well as notions of where the milk comes from and who it belongs to. So because monetary compensation visually appears in connection with the pumping of breast milk, and rhetorically in the context of helping premature infants, it is naturalized as a form of payment related to labor that also goes into pumping, and additionally, importantly in the material, as an act of altruism. So in that sense, monetary compensation and altruism in the Danish case can sort of go hand in hand. So in the case of Denmark, women providing other women with breast milk are viewed as donors rather than the term workers, sellers, or the term used throughout our work, providers. And I think it is important to think about the terms that we use. Are you a donor, which gets really tied in with altruism? Or are you, when you're providing women with a milk bank with breast milk, a provider or a worker, etc.? So clearly this kind of gift-giving metaphor also becomes a way to legitimize and to construct a natural sort of narrative around the ways in which women are seen as naturally providing other women with their reproductive fluids and reproductive labor. So let's look at the second before I open up for discussions. And here you see the photo on the lower right-hand side is a photo from the milk bank where milk is being picked up after it's being picked up by the driver and brought to the milk bank and is being mixed and examined. And on the upper right-hand side, you see the milk that is being provided and put into a refrigerated container by one of the providers. So what we're talking about is how this milk becomes exchangeable by being moved from the idea of being maternal milk to becoming banked milk. And this kind of movement naturalizes the idea that the milk is no longer provides or no longer belongs to the woman it comes from, but has moved into a different context. So while the term women's milk or mother's milk sometimes is the preferred term used in breastfeeding contexts in Denmark, banked milk seems to replace it. And this is done, we think, to also enable it to enter a particular type of property. Banking of body parts has, feminist scholars have already discussed, been chiefly supported by the collective action of medical societies seeking to advance professional goals and patient care by having body products or fluids available to use to treat a patient and when and where it's needed. So despite these lofty goals for professing care, the development of successful body banks has been reliant upon various technologies of refrigeration and cold storage. And this is also the case in the case of women's milk. This, of course, does not mean that it doesn't have various sort of problematic aspects in it. In the case of Denmark, the move from maternal milk to banked milk sort of entangles with the emergence of breast milk as a form of excess milk. We see this in the example of the woman that we have on the upper right-hand side, who evidently had an excess of over 4,000 liters of milk. And we see it in the story of another provider who has a freezer full of breast milk and decided that it would be a shame, as she said, to throw it out. That excess, the idea of having something in excess, is not just straightforward, and it's certainly not necessarily a naturally occurring phenomenon. So to ask a provider to position milk as excess of their infants' requirements means working with women's own understandings of their milk supply and their infants' needs. This is something many not-for-profit milk banks take seriously as an ethical practice by talking about women and doing it in the enrollment process. So in short, for this analytical part, the Danish examples shown here illustrates and are quite similar to some of the studies done in the United States, that breast milk providing comes across a naturalized caring practice. And also when mixed with stories of milk naturally flowing, becomes seen as something that is natural, and thus sometimes feminist scholars might worry about that the natural becomes a term to help forget the work that goes into it. So in my concluding notes here today, I want to just make three quick concluding arguments and then open up for discussions. So I've discussed how breast milk providing emerges and becomes understood as a property within a web of relations. So rather than merely becoming a valued property, thanks to the technological innovations at the human milk bank processing facility, it also emerges in the relationships between the developing body, the developing maternal body, and of course, the fetus, the pumping and storage technologies, as well as discursively within a set of conventional cultural discourses that become perpetuated by the Danish welfare state related to good motherhood and public health, as sort of a form of welfare state provision from and for the Danish state. Banked maternal milk then becomes positioned as a life-saving fluid, the best nutrition that baby can get, a female shared substance, a form of Danish sister solidarity, an act of self-care, pure love in a bottle, as well as once frozen and banked, a mobile nutritional substance. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm sorry for the short break. I'll take a bit more water, and I'm very happy to hear of your thoughts and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Really, thank you so much. It's so interesting. I still remember the first time I heard about your research in Berlin. I was really fascinated, and still is, and I still am. So if there are any questions, please either open your microphone or write it down in the chat. There are among us also young mothers who have experienced quite recently the advantage and disadvantage of breastfeeding. So you're also very welcome to tell something about your own history and so on. As usual, just to start, if you want to stop sharing, so at least you can see us, Charlotte, because otherwise,
Yeah, it's a good
otherwise you cannot see
idea.
us.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you.
So I start really just for breaking the ice. I start keeping on discussing with you, because this is something that we already did also the other day. The difference between this form of commodification and other forms of commodification, of course, that are much less accepted. The other day, we were talking about surrogacy, of course, and talking really as an economist. As a matter of fact, in a very strict economic sense, I don't see any difference between a banked milk and a rented womb, because from an economic point of view, it's exactly the same process. It's exactly the same process of commodification, of course, with differences, of course, of physical differences, but not in principle. In principle, of course, we are talking about the same thing. One part of your body, or one part of a product of your body is commodified, while according to nature, it should just be a gift, as you said, or in any case, something connected to human relations between mother and son, or daughter, of course, in this case. So you want to tell us something about surrogacy in Denmark? Because it's very interesting what you told me the other day.
Yeah. I mean, I've done quite a bit of work on sort of more the cultural aspects associated with reproductive technologies, and surrogacy has come up a number of times. It used to be that Danish couples that could not have children and needed a surrogate would actually go to first India, then Mexico, then if they could afford it, the United States, and then the Ukraine, which some are actually still doing, but with various kinds of complications. So today, surrogacy is being discussed amongst Danish politicians, whether or not it should be permitted, and whether or not it should be permitted to be done in Denmark. So it's not actually permitted yet, but perhaps one of the another sort of reproductive substance that's interesting and that really kind of shows the gendered aspects is the difference between women's eggs and men's sperm. So you may or may not know, but Denmark brands itself as being the world's exporter of sperm. That is, that in Denmark there is a sperm bank called Cryos, and Cryos says that it's the world's largest sperm bank, and most of the donors are from various Danish cities and students. So Danish men have always received money for their for donating sperm. It's never been discussed. However, when it came to women's eggs and donating eggs, there have been huge discussions on whether or not this should be possible and whether or not it should be done just altruistically, that is, with no money whatsoever. And it was even at one point discussed whether or not women should be allowed to donate eggs, let's say, to a friend or to a sister, and then have the procedure, the treatment be done out of the country. So whereas it seemed like there was an acceptance of Danish men going everywhere, their sperm going everywhere in the world, Danish women's eggs should stay inside the national boundaries. Now that has changed some, but there's definitely, I think, surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, milk donation, there is a clear difference when it comes to women's bodies and the ways in which women's reproductive labor, and I think it is reproductive labor, is being accounted for. So whereas you can donate sperm and it's being seen as labor and you're being paid, there's a squeamishness, so there's a concern that when it comes to women, the women's reproductive bodies should be in the domestic field and should not enter the sphere of money and economics, even though it certainly does all the time. So I think it's interesting, and this is why doing interdisciplinary work is very interesting, Marcella, because it, in a sense, it's sort of is very provocative. Absolutely. To say that milk donating is no different from surrogacy or from, I mean, that's very provocative. Absolutely. To say. But I think what it does is that it brings us to an understanding that women's reproductive labor is being sort of positioned in more invisible domestic sphere. And that's, of course, problematic.
Absolutely. Oh, this is really crucial for feminist economics, of course.
Yeah.
The distinction between paid and unpaid work and reproductive work as part of unpaid work is really crucial for our criticism, of course, of the economic paradigm, of the mainstream economic paradigm. So thank you so much. Yeah, I never heard about the sperm industry from Denmark.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's really it's really a confirmation of the stereotypes according to which, as you said, I mean, men selling their sperm are not doing a reproductive work, while women selling their eggs instead are doing, and this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And not certainly from an ethical point of view, because as we said also the other day, usually in Denmark is not for ethical reasons that this is discussed, but really just for social norms. Just social norms.
Yeah, and there is also sort of, in terms of the Danish case, that there is a problematic in terms of who is the mother. I mean, in the Danish law, the father is the one married to the mother, right? And the mother is the one who gives birth. So birth giving is legally central.
By law is like that.
By law is central to our understanding of who the mother is, and of course, then if you have surrogacy, it becomes problematic, right? Because
but even with adoption, I mean, how does it work with adoption?
Well, adoption sort of interestingly sort of falls in a different arena. You will be the adopted mother based on the adoption process, but not based on a surrogacy process. And it has implications in terms of who can access food, who can access doctor's visits, school, communication, etc. So it's and it's interesting because we also know that the idea that the father is the one who's married to the mother is maybe a bit naive.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, is it true that in Italian we all say is always sure who the mother is, but you are never sure who the father is?
And that's true. But you might say with surrogacy, you're not sure who the mother is either, right? I mean, you might make that very same with the new sort of reproductive technologies. Yeah.
Well, I could keep on talking, but I mean, I just want to know whether some of our friends connected, also the students, of course, have any comment or question that would like to share with Charlotte. Don't be shy.
No, don't be shy. Or even if you want to say anything about the Italian context.
Yeah, indeed.
If you know anything about the Italian context, can you donate mother's milk in Italy?
Well, I don't want to answer that directly. I just wait
Yeah.
first, and then otherwise I will answer to you. No, nobody? Okay, so I actually, the two mothers that I mentioned before have left, so probably for caregiving. Anyway, I tell you the story because I was a breastfeeder, an intense breastfeeder, because I had two children, and I breastfed the first one for 21 months and the second one for 18 months. So and was not easy, especially at the beginning. Nobody, I mean, is an experienced breastfeeder until she doesn't start. So, and so what really helped me, apart, of course, of the help of the midwives, as usual, in medical terms, what helped me a lot is what we have, not only in Italy, but I mean, for sure we have in big cities in Italy, that is the so-called Lecce League. I wonder whether you had any contact with them. The Lecce League, Lecce, of course, in Spanish is milk. The Lecce League is just an association of breastfeeder that voluntarily just help each other, sharing experiences, meeting if there is a need to meet, of course. Obviously, this is done in proximity because these mothers, of course, are very busy, so they cannot really stay for, I mean, travel for these purposes. But in proximity, I mean, especially in big towns like Rome, they help each other quite a lot. And that was really extremely useful for me for many reasons. Well, first of all, because experience matters a lot in these cases, and the sharing of experience was extremely helpful, but also in terms of sympathy, I would say, because otherwise what happens is that when you cannot breastfeed in the proper way, apart from the physical reaction of your body, so the pain and so on, but also you feel extremely stressed, extremely, well, you can even become depressed. I mean, there might be even forms of depression related to that. And medical doctors usually, at least in Italy, do not help at all. Because the first thing they say, okay, if you cannot breastfeed, well, let's move to artificial milk. You know, it's much easier for you, for your baby. The baby will grow even better than with your milk. I mean, this is still typical in Italy. So the help of other mothers, of other breastfeeders, for me was really important, especially from a psychological point of view. And of course, what happened eventually is that having breastfed for such a long time meant that I was freezing my milk for the babysitters and so on. And then eventually I donated my milk to this association that was also able to share the milk among mothers and so on, but only on a voluntarily based, nothing commercial, nothing. And as far as I know, I mean, at least at my time, there were no bank milk. I mean, it was not banked milk. So I wonder whether there is now. My kids, of course, now are grown up, but I never heard about it. So no. I actually, when I heard you the first time, I said I have to check, but then I forgot. And
yeah. I think today in Denmark too, aside from the banked milk, there are various Facebook groups, there are various social media groups where women help each other out. and where they will do the voluntary giving of breast milk within the groups. So social media has become an interesting way of gaining information and
Getting in
support.
contact and exchange.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that story, Marcella. That's very
No,
unique.
well, I'm sorry that the other two left. One is Marina,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other one is Chiara, because I know their stories. And but as I
Hello,
said, probably they
Marcella.
had to go and pick up their children at school or something like that at the kindergarten, because unfortunately this is the time that usually people leave for that reason. So
Hello, Marcella. Can you say me?
Chiara is
Do you
here.
hear me?
Oh, sorry, Chiara, I didn't
Sorry.
see you. So
I
Chiara,
not
if you want to add anything about your
I
motherhood
cannot turn on the
experience.
cam because I have fever, so my image is not beautiful. But nowadays the situation is better than yours, because, for example, my son is 2 years old, no, and I breakfasted for 6 months, but no one told me or give me information about milk bank. And in the hospital there is the expectation that mothers are able for breakfasting directly the baby, and no one described me the physical, the emotional problem. They simply expect my physical response, but it's not an immediate reaction. And also in some cases for me was difficult, no, because for physical problem my baby, I know that I needed contact with him, so but no one gave me a useful help. When I come back home, my mother teach me how I can breakfast my son.
So it's a mother and daughter relationship in your case.
Yeah. There is, I live in Viterbo, that is near Rome, but is smaller, no? There is a voluntary association that allow mother for exchanging the experience, but the number the number of participants is not high. 5 for mother, no? And it's difficult to share the experience. You have to use the personal relationship, the household relationship. Also, I use the internet for informing about the possibility for freezing milk when I come back to the work, no? But no, the official structure didn't give me the information or the necessary help.
Interesting. Yeah. So in a sense, I mean, it would have been difficult if you had not the relationship with your mother, that sort of mother to daughter relationship.
Yeah. My mother, for example, said to me that the pain was normal, no? But in the first time, no? And no one said me, during the pregnancy, they give you a beautiful image, and not tell you that there is more physical disadvantages,
Yeah.
We were talking about that with Chiara quite recently, because it was really tough for her at a certain point. She's a young researcher, of course, she had to go back to work. Well, there is a question by Agnese Marcigliano. Agnese, please open your microphone.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, there's maybe some sounds because I'm at the bus stop. So before I go up on the bus, which would be difficult for communication, I just wanted to, the presentation and the conversation was making me think about something that happened very recently. I have a colleague in my office who just came back from maternity. And so she's actually still breastfeeding her baby, of course, because she's like 8 months or something. But I was surprised talking about the situations of the different countries, because I live in Belgium, and I have this vision of, I had this vision of Belgium as a very traditional country in terms of family values. And so I wasn't thinking about the fact that breastfeeding would be seen, there would be a stigma attached to breastfeeding, because she expressed to me a story that they were in the weekends and she was with other young mothers, and actually one friend of her, she said it to her, like, oh yeah, I am gonna give the food to my baby. There's a chair and everything, and you can warm up your milk, artificial milk in that case. And my colleague said, no, I just need a cushion, because she was breastfeeding. And actually, I didn't understand. I didn't really realize that there was the stigma attached to breastfeeding, but a negative stigma in this case. That was peculiar, because the other mother was saying, then don't be surprised if your baby doesn't develop an immune system, which is a bit the contrary of what they tell you, because normally breastfeeding should increase the immune system. So I don't know. There was this peculiar reaction, and it was interesting to see the discussion between two young mothers, because they are like 35, between 30 and 35. So I think the society is a bit shifting. I don't know if in a good sense or not. So that was my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Agnese. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's an interesting, good contribution. Definitely. And I think it also shows sort of the cultural components of this, right? That,
Absolutely.
how important the cultural component is.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder whether there is any comment. Our time, of course, is finishing now. I see something written in the chat. No, nothing. It was just a mistake. Well, somebody had to leave, but at the same time said thank you so much. And Charlotte, I also put some links to your profile, to your publications, to your projects. So, and of course also to the project of your colleague in Australia, so that people could see that in the meantime.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are comments just to thank you and say how interesting it was. As I told you, it's the end of the semester, unfortunately, so students are leaving earlier. But anyway, so thank you so much. I really
thank you, Marcella.
It was really
a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.
It was really a pleasure to have you here with us. And we look forward to meeting you again, to keep on discussing about this topic. Congratulations for your new projects on sex hormones.
Thank you.
And see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you, everyone. And good luck with your exams. Bye.